Date. I am Lisa Itzkowitz, Director of the JCC Academic Center at the JCC of Mid-Westchester, and I'm pleased to present tonight's program in partnership with Woolf College Consulting. We have been running inside the admissions office every fall for the past 12 years. This year was to be lucky 13. This is our first special edition, and sadly, it's not for a positive reason. As we all know, we are living through unprecedented times. The pandemic has created a tremendous level, and that's an understatement, of uncertainty for high school and college students. Tonight, we are privileged to have the deans and directors of admissions from 5 colleges and universities from around the country. In a minute, you will meet them, and tonight's moderator, Betsy Woolf. For those of you who may not be familiar with the JCC Academic Center, we have been offering test prep for SAT, ACT, SAT subject tests, AP, and Regents exams for nearly 20 years, as well as college admissions programs. This summer, as always, we will offer SAT and ACT and college application prep classes. Our next prep program, the College Application Essay 10 Survival Tips for Students and Parents, will be held on June 16th. For now, we are planning our programs to be virtual, but as soon as it is safe to return to our physical space, we hope to transition back to in-person classes. The JCC is also currently offering a full range of virtual fitness, arts and entertainment, and adult classes, which are open to everyone. So I encourage you, visit our website, jccmw.org, to learn more. And I will put that in the chat box as well. A few housekeeping rules. You are all on mute right now, and we ask you to stay that way throughout. After the panel discussion, there will be time for Q&A, but we are asking to save the Q&A, your questions, until the Q&A. You can ask your questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to answer as many of your questions as possible. It is now my pleasure to introduce Betsy Woolf, founder of Woolf College Consulting. Betsy?
Thank you, Lisa. It's really been a pleasure doing this with you all of these years. And I'm so happy that the deans have been able to join us and all of you who we're seeing virtually now. Just as a small aside, today happens to be my wedding anniversary. And I'm sort of happy to share this anniversary with all of you. Hence, if you can see the flowers on the back, that's been my anniversary gift. So let me introduce you to our deans. If you would all unmute, if we can see you all now, and we'll go through the list. Let me start with Craig at Binghamton.
Hello, everybody. I'm Craig Brockley with Binghamton University. I'm the Associate Director of Admissions, but I'm actually based in the New York City area now. So I cover the lower parts of New York for Binghamton, which is part of SUNY in upstate New York, 3 hours from here.
Muhlenberg.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa Falk. I'm the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Muhlenberg College. Thanks for inviting me into your home. Actually, you're in my home this evening as well, so good to have you.
Rice University.
Good evening. My name is Tamara Seiler. I'm Deputy Director of Admission with a specialty in Access and Inclusion. And greetings from Rice University in Houston, Texas. Well, actually, greetings from my home. This is my 28th year as a member of the Rice admissions staff, my I think 20th year of covering New York. And so I'm really pleased to be here tonight and share whatever information I can with you.
Vanderbilt.
Hi everyone, my name is Sabrina Paxton. I'm an admissions counselor here at Vanderbilt in Nashville. I am located in Nashville, but I do take care of the Westchester County up in New York. So thanks so much for having me.
And last but not least, Colgate University.
Well, good evening. My name is Lynn Holcomb, and I'm a Senior Associate Dean of Admission at Colgate University, also a very proud Colgate alumnus as well. And for years, I covered Westchester. I moved a little south to the metro New York City area, but thank you so much for having us tonight.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're going to get into this right away because we've got a lot to cover. And some of the issues that we're going to cover tonight have been from questions that you have asked, so we do appreciate your questions. Starting out, we know the phrase communication is key. For the schools, how are you communicating with your high school students and with the parents in particular? Anybody feel free to jump in.
I'll start with a lot is similar to how we've always had with different communication streamlines, parent sort of communication line. This is specific to Binghamton, but we're trying to, I know a lot of my peers at other schools are trying to stay as normal as possible with communication. Though I will say what I did notice this year is actually more of an opportunity. A lot of schools, Binghamton included, have a lot more, I would say, forward-facing digital points of connection now. So like our office hours or Zoom hours. So there's an open-ended sort of like, come to us, ask us questions. We're here to kind of talk you through what this process looks like. Where traditionally, either you showed up on campus or you called. I think there's a little bit more of an opportunity now with this Zoom platform or any other platform that helps. So that's been a little bit of a change.
Anybody else?
And I think many of us have, we know that there's a lot of questions, and as we have answers, we've been posting them on our website. I think all of us have created sort of parking areas for certain types of information, and we've even segmented it into information for admitted students, information for prospective students, information for parents. And so we're trying to provide as much information online so that people can check in. And even our president is doing sort of weekly updates and putting that in there that is available for students, for parents, for alumni, anyone who wants to stay abreast of what's going on at the university.
Okay, great, thank you. I know you're all juggling a lot of different things and a lot of new things. So let's talk about what you're going to do to prepare for the fall. Can you give us some of the scenarios that you are considering?
I'll start. We could spend a lot of time on this, but I think there's a lot of similar actions being taken at most colleges, and they range from, I don't think there will be a return to 100% normal by the end of August, but there is the hope for in-person classes. There is the hope for a hybrid, some type of virtual as well as in-person. There is a hope for, needs to be a plan for a later start or a virtual fall and an immersion into something different come the spring. And then the hope that, that the reality, which we hope we don't get to, is sort of an extended virtual learning platform. I think a lot of the work on colleges is really the same as it's been on the high school level, is that first and foremost this spring we had to take care of our students, and that was really the focus. And so a lot of times we've had questions from parents about what can we expect moving forward. And I think one thing that can be a really good indication of how a college is going to move forward is how well they were able to pivot this spring and the care and intention that they had to their on their campus and what that feeling is like on our campus. The end, no one wants to be virtual. No, I mean, there are some, as Craig said, a few benefits that we've had to rethink communication that hopefully will stay with us and provide more points of connection in this process. But this isn't anyone's ideal. But you can learn a lot about how a college has handled elements of communication and care. It's not as though there's going to be colleges that can open and colleges that can't open. We're all really going to be going through this together. There may be some regional differences in time frame and when colleges can announce what they're doing, but our hope for all of us is to be back in person. So there are a lot of different scenarios that need to play out. One thing specifically that Colgate is doing is we've started in the spring looking very very much taking care of our students, taking care of academics, and then moving into a transition where we focused first on what is going to be the best platform academically to allow virtual as well as in-person learning. And we've made some modifications to our academic calendar for next year, offering short-term intense classes in January and June for the sole purpose that we know kids want to be on campus. So let's try to use parts of our calendar that we know we hope we will be able to use in full. And now we're really focusing on the campus reopen plan. And so despite the need for, we all want a lot of questions, if we all have a lot of questions and want answers, but the more we rush that, the last thing we want to do is retract. So it's hard to encourage people to be patient, but I think that is something we really have to focus on right now.
Do any of you have any particular dates by which you're going to make announcements as to what you're going to do?
We're announcing by June 30th.
And we, our president went live last week. So we have committed to a hybrid model starting in August, and we will end our semester before Thanksgiving. And so, so I think almost all of us will do, if we are in person, we're going to have some sort of shortened in-person experience.
Tamara, does that mean that students will then go online after Thanksgiving? Because I've seen that scenario, and then maybe do finals or final exams, or does it mean you really will have a hard stop, let's say on Thanksgiving?
No, then they'll do their final. For those that want to go home, they will do their finals online. For those who may not have the capacity to go home or may have instability, and that was something we did in the spring as well, for students that did not have stable internet connections or were home insecure, or just it would not have been a safe situation for them to go home. We allowed about 250 students to remain on campus with the support of our institution. So I think a number of people had those adjustments that they made with a much smaller population. So in a way, we've had some experience in keeping our students safe in that smaller population. And now it's a matter of utilizing our researchers, utilizing our maker spaces to make sure that we're creating PPE and that we're getting all of the safety measures in hand. So I'm sure others are doing that, the whole research, PPE, contact tracing, all of that is going to be in place.
I see a lot of heads shaking, yes. Are you all subject, though, to what the governors of your states will allow as well? Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we all are in many capacities, and also I would speak on behalf of a lot of my peers at Publix, even more so based on the directives and how that hierarchy works, which is, something to be noted, like when you look at state by state, sort of how things are acting out and working. But there is that level of hierarchy, but I'll even, for New York, I mean, the SUNY schools are pretty autonomous, though there's been a lot of movement towards getting some sort of confirmation of an idea out by mid-June. Some schools have more of a plan than others publicly facing right now, but there's a commitment towards, yes, keeping the governors in line, but in check with what we're doing and what they want us to do, and so forth.
For seniors, what's happening at your schools with your waitlist activity? Are you seeing more students coming off the waitlist? Do you have a deadline by which you will take students off the waitlist?
I can just talk for our school. We haven't really seen much more of an increase in our waitlist use than we have in the past. We've used our waitlist for the past 20 years. That's always something that we will utilize. We typically close our waitlist around July 4th, but it can be open a little bit longer. But I don't think we have seen much more of an increase in our waitlist use this year.
Have any of you seen a bigger use of the waitlist than in the past?
We have this year, but I think it really just depends on who else has gone to the wait list for more. So, I won't get into the specifics, but we've just had a few schools that we directly, you know, sort of sit right above us that have gone, you know, and that's just hit or miss on the year. I don't necessarily see that COVID related. I think it's just how we sort of fall in the priority list of schools for students.
Okay, so one of the things that I've been hearing is that parents are concerned that tuition fees will stay the same whether or not students are on campus. They're also concerned about the college experience being different because so much of this is interpersonal connections when students are on campus, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's outside the classroom. How do you respond to that? And are there any plans afoot to make adjustments to tuition, or is that something you haven't really addressed as yet?
There's certainly questions that we've certainly been receiving. I'm sure my colleagues have as well. Part of the difficulty is if we don't know what the fall looks like yet in terms of if our campuses haven't made our decisions about what that fall will look like, whether it's hybrid, in person, totally online, whatever version of that is, the difficulty is in terms of addressing that. Because even though while the tuition piece of things is certainly, I think from the public facing perspective, includes the entire college experience, we're really focused internally on the educational experience in terms of what that supports, right? But that's going to vary from school to school. And so those are questions that were being asked that I have not been in the position to answer as of yet, given that we do not know exactly what the plan is for the fall. I don't know if other people on the panel are having different experiences on that front, but the questions are definitely being asked at this point.
That question was asked of us quite a bit in the spring, because particularly at Colgate, when students went home, we did reimburse for room and board for students that left mid-semester. Like Tamara said, we had quite a few hundred students stay on campus actually, because Colgate was a safer and healthier place for them to finish their academics. And we still have some international students on campus that we're housing over the summer, and most schools are the same. We responded to that question in the spring regarding, you know, the cost of tuition is in that there's been a lot of talk about if everything's online, does it matter where you go to college? And I think that depends on what you're looking for out of the learning experience, and that's something a family needs to answer. Our students are still engaging with research with their faculty members at Colgate. They're still doing high-level intellectual engagement. Our faculty are still having office hours 3 to 5 hours per week. They're still getting a high level of personal learning and personal instruction in the makeup of Colgate. And as I said, it's not how maybe what is ideal, but the level of attention that individuals are getting, we're still keeping our average class sizes incredibly small. So, you know, you need to think about what you want that experience to be. Even though it is virtual, our classrooms have been live. They have been live discussions. We moved all of our classes into a functional format for live group discussion and follow-up. And our faculty have actually said that they're having more one-on-one with students who linger in the chat room after a class than they did when they were on campus because they had to rush to go to a club or an activity. In an intellectual space and in an intellectual college, you are going to get a higher level of contact through some of these platforms. Because honestly, if any of you have children at home, I have 2 teenagers, I mean, they're looking for things to do. So this is actually ripe for a really, really rich academic experience for students. And so we have been very vocal and very clear with families that the quality of intellectual instruction is going to be still top-notch. Not to put down other versions of education, but you as a family, only you can make that choice about what you're looking for. It's not going to be in person, but we are bringing it as close as we can to the quality of intellectual engagement that would be true of any Colgate education. And this is a short-term experience, we hope. You know, we're talking with families right now about a 4-year experience and a 4-year plan of life skills. And especially at most of the colleges here, selective institutions are really hard to transfer into. So if you're thinking about, oh, I'll do community college for a year and then maybe go on to college, that's not always as easy as it may seem. So you need to think about what you want your end goal to be. and realize that nobody really has an advantage in this. This is a pandemic that has hit everyone across the world. And the best thing we can do is to, encourage our high school seniors to be part of a community that will provide them support as they work through this transition.
Thank you. So one of the things that I hear from students from talking to them is how important visiting is to them. And I assume you all do tours and you do know that as well. What kind of advice can you give to students who cannot visit campus right now? And do any of you anticipate a time when students will be able to tour this summer, this fall, next year?
I would say, surprising to us, we did hear from our president that there is the possibility of welcoming smaller groups. I think the time for large groups is not going to happen. So in a way, if we do end up welcoming students back to campus, it's going to be a smaller experience. It's going to be a more personal experience. But I answered this question before, and I think, people are like, how do you discover the campus? Well, I mean, there's only so much of the campus experience that really is buildings. It's people. And so I think that's what we're really trying to stress through the virtual experiences that we're having, is that, I would say there's an availability of faculty and students and the president and the provost and people who would normally possibly be doing something else this year that are not doing those things. And so they're having the shared experience with you. They're not going, they are working on their research. They're doing online, and you're getting access to things you might not have gotten access to if they didn't live in this virtual environment and didn't have the constraints on them as well. So I think that there's an exploration that you're going to be able to do of schools that's going to be unprecedented, because you're going to have so many people, and even the admission officers who might be traveling to different places will have more capacity to actually be able to be available to answer one-on-one type of questions and to create unique, and I think all of us are trying to create experiences that truly represent the uniqueness of our institution. So I think even though you can't physically be on campus, I think you're going to get an idea of what the culture is of that campus still through some of the virtual experiences they choose to offer. And I think you're going to have unprecedented contact with people who you might not have had contact with had you been on campus.
Wow. Do you anticipate that any of you will be able to travel this fall, or has that not been determined as yet?
Depends if people want us. No, no, there's definitely talk about how to do this, even in a hybrid way. We're all hopeful that we can get out there and do what we normally do. But I don't want to dial always back into what was just said, but the opportunities that come into place, like we can actually engage a lot more in a virtual setting. And I would just want to add to this, and this is for all the families out there exploring and think, this is an unprecedented opportunity, because all of these colleges are putting their stuff online in different ways, for you to look at more schools than you've ever looked at before. So maybe the same old 20 list that everybody applies to can now be 30, or not that you apply to 30 schools, 40 schools that you really zoned in on, because you can look at these schools differently without having to worry about, how often did you stop on that campus to show interest. You could do this, and students, you better be doing this in a different way, and you have time to check out these colleges. So, and we are here, even if we're not traveling in the fall, to really be there forward facing with our students and families.
I tend to be an optimist, so I like to look at the positives of things. So one thing that I have actually, our staff members have talked quite a bit about is this is really, as Craig said, given an opportunity in many ways to level the playing field. This isn't about needing to coordinate schedules with your family or have the resources to travel across the country or the time. This gives you the opportunity to really investigate all colleges on a sort of an equal experience. And with sort of the reduction of other activities going on in high school students' lives, I've been actually very impressed at the number of juniors that I've been speaking to in this time of year, where honestly, I think otherwise they would be gearing up for a number of junior year ceremonies and prom and finals and a whole host of things that maybe still be taking place in other formats, but allows them the opportunity to sign up for that one-on-one conversation with us and really get a sense and talk to our students and talk to our faculty. So there are a lot of benefits that are coming from this as we've all had to reshape how we connect with students and families.
How is talking to you that way different from interviewing? Because students might be concerned if I pick up the phone or I do a Zoom meeting with somebody in admissions office, they're checking off a box that says, I did a good job. No, I didn't.
I think I think we're meeting students where they live. They live in technology. We're the ones uncomfortable with technology a little bit more than they are, but we're finally in their world. So I found with most settings, students have a high level of comfort with hopping on to technology platforms as a way to integrate. And if they're not comfortable, they can keep their video off, and some students do that, but the level of conversation is still very high.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk about deferrals and gap years, which is something that's on the mind of a fair number of seniors. Can you talk about your policies, what they've been, whether or not they'll change? Some of the concern is if you'll cap the number of students who can defer or limit any of the reasons that they give you for why they want to defer. And then one of the questions I received from a parent is a concern that if more students than typically are taking gap years, will there then be fewer slots available for juniors when they graduate and become freshmen?
So my comment about that, because actually that's one of the most frequently asked questions this spring. I don't know about you all, but that's like a very common question about the impact of the number of deferrals for this graduating class, for the subsequent class, the group that we're talking to tonight, right? And so I think folks have to remember that a deferral is a request and it's not an automatic approval. And so colleges are going to manage that as such in terms of their future plans for future sizes of classes. That being said, I can tell you, interestingly, in Muhlenberg, and we're a college of 2,150 students, so we're not a huge place by any stretch, but in any given class, very typically we'll have 24 to 30 students who are deferring for the year, which is pretty sizable when you think about the size of our class. Right now, from what I'm observing, we're not even close to that number currently in terms of the number of requests. We're seeing less requests right now at this time of the year. And so it's sort of just an interesting observation to share in light of that. So while that is a fear, perhaps on the side of the college going group now who are juniors, I'm not experiencing that directly in my world right now in terms of a rash or an overabundance of deferral requests. Right now, I don't know about everybody else is shaking their heads. So yeah. So I offer that as a piece of perspective anyway. While you may think that is the case, it may not actually be the reality of what we're experiencing right now on the college side.
Anybody, any one of you of the other four seeing an increase in deferral requests?
I mean, it's all relative. I mean, we saw a slight increase, but I mean, it's still under 20 students. So it's not, I think this is an interesting thing, because I think some students are realizing that it really is, we may never see a challenge like this again. And there's a little bit of strength to be drawn from being part of a cohort that's going to go through this together. And I think that especially if you stress community, is that students are ready for, if we can create the right synergy, students are ready for that adventure of being together. And they don't necessarily want to miss out on the chance to build those relationships, no matter how they come. I mean, maybe it's virtually, but I think all of us are going to work to not just be online virtually and that's all they're going to do. We're going to create spaces, much like we did for, admitted student events. I think some of us created the synergy of like, you know, bringing together current students with prospective students and creating coffee talks and things like that. So it's not just going to be like I'm plugging online and doing all my courses. There will be opportunities to truly connect with your classmates if indeed you know, that some people end up doing it virtually. And again, some of us are planning for in-person instruction, but I think that, you know, and you have to have a plan. You can't just, you know, say, I want to defer. You actually literally have to say what you're going to be doing instead of school. And, you know, the ones that we've received have been quite thoughtful. I mean, some students are looking at this, oh, you know, I've needed to do this, or I've wanted to connect with family in another area, or I really wanted to do this volunteer experience that I've been accepted into. But it's not that they're just going and saying, school's going to be virtual, so I just want to take a gap year. That's not an acceptable, or that's not even, you know, a reasonable way to take a gap year.
Okay.
I just wanted to add one thing on this because because the question ties into the larger effects that college enrollment to any university is not like this linear process that's one seat goes here and then therefore I have less of a chance. Even 2 years down the road from now, we're still going to want students at our institutions. You know, just focusing on gap years or deferrals, you know, excludes the fact, what about how many students decided to go to a 2-year school and finish their associates? So there's a lull that next year, you know, when that deferral year would have came into play. So maybe they're already filling those seats. Or how many students decide not to defer, but now since the game has changed, that first year, wherever they went with this hybrid learning, they decide they want to go somewhere else now. So we lose more students in the next year. And then those deferral, we need more than what we just deferred. So there's so many variables is all I wanted to say, that the deferral part should not probably be a focal point of any of this. And we haven't seen much of a change in it. We actually grant a lot of deferrals at Binghamton. It hasn't changed much this year. We have up until July 1st to make that final decision there. But yeah, it's not as drastic as I think people tend to put the emphasis on.
Okay. Let's move a little bit to APs this year. It affects seniors, but it had a bigger effect on juniors, I think, this year. And there were so many hiccups, registration problems, computer browsers that didn't work, some human error. That first week was really tough for a lot of students. And the College Board then said for the second week, they were going to make some accommodations, let students do some emails, but there's nothing they could do about the first week. So one question is, how do you use APs in general? And are you using them differently now, given the problems that have happened, and given the fact that there's a new format for the APs now?
I think there's two things that, oh, actually, Sabrina, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to mention for our Vanderbilt's policy, we don't require AP tests. We obviously like to see that you're taking AP courses or IB courses, whatever are the most, you know, challenging at your school, but we don't require those scores. So if you did have issues with those tests, something occurred, you don't have to send us those scores. Those are not a required part of the process. And obviously, you know, we'll take into context all the challenges and issues that students had this semester. So that's just our policy.
And that's exactly, I mean, I think there's two things to really focus on here. One is the importance of the advanced level coursework and how that helps prepare you with the depth of reading, the depth of writing that comes from an AP course. And that value in the admissions process is still going to be very present. Very, very important to the process. Schools vary so much on AP credit. We are continuing at Colgate to take AP credit, but we're pretty particular. I mean, it's ideally 4s and 5s, and it's up to department approval. And so there may or may not be a lot of students, you know, in any given year who are getting advanced level credit. So, you know, I think students need to understand that the value from a learning perspective has been the coursework that was really, really in tune in their class until March. And then things did get a little bit questionable. And I know there is a cost to take the test and there's a hope for college credit. And that may have more of an impact on some schools than others. But all all is not lost. Like the value of taking that course is very, very important to your critical thinking, to your writing ability, to your discussion ability, and it is an important building block, especially for juniors going into their senior year and then transitioning into college.
Okay, speaking of testing, if the College Board and the ACT go online with their testing, maybe you should all raise your hands. Will you accept those results? Nobody?
I mean,
Probably.
yes. I think the we have to wait and see. I think as long we still want to be doing the right thing by students, and so we have to wait and see what the path leads to. But I think as long as there's a certain level of integrity, I think we would be inclined to do whatever's going to be in the best interest of students.
Okay, so let's talk about test optional. How many of you are test optional now? I should ask how many who aren't. And have any of you switched to a test optional policy? And can you tell us why you have?
We moved to, Colgate moved to test optional for this upcoming year. And it can potentially serve as a pilot moving forward. The biggest reason we had the conversations was when it became pretty clear that this pandemic was not going to end in 6 weeks and it wasn't going to be back to business as usual. There's a lot of anxiety around the college process, and Colgate's review, as all of ours here, is holistic, and testing is simply one part of that process. I think sometimes it gets a little bit more, higher expectation, but it is simply part of the process. So for Colgate, our focus has always been on the quality of coursework, the students' performance in the class, written evaluations from teachers, sort of that context around the learning environment. So it is less critical for us to have that testing component as part of our application process. And there are a lot of unknowns. Students on the supplement to Colgate will have an option to indicate whether or not they want us to use their test scores in the process. So for students who were able to test, or the online testing, or maybe testing centers open in the fall, they'll have that opportunity if they want that evaluated as part of their process. And for students who don't, we're trying to take a level of stress out of the process for them. And then we will use this as a benchmark moving forward to see how it influenced our application review process.
Because one of the questions I got from a parent, which was interesting to me, that if you're if you're going test optional for the first time this year, does it mean that if a student submits the test scores and they're good test scores, that the scores won't be given as much weight as in the past?
Students are driving this process. So, I mean, they have the choice. If they want to use their testing, we will use it as part of the academic review. But testing has not always driven the selection process. So, I think that's important to know. It will be a factor we will use in conjunction with the other information in their application if the student chooses to select that option as part of their application.
And then I would assume, going on to another parent's question, that based on your answer, that if the student doesn't submit test scores, it's not that the extracurricular involvement will play a greater part than anything else. Again, it goes back to what you're looking at, I assume. Everything.
I mean, I think it's important, as in any year, testing falls under the category of academics, right? And academics is telling you a very big part of a student's sort of pathway at our institution. And I'll just add to that, the variables every year probably change school to school, but we just don't ask about it. We don't really drive in on it because it really doesn't matter to the applicant. You don't really control it no matter what. You're still applying the same way you would normally apply. So whether the variables change, I think I want to de-stress that part as much. Granted, a lot more schools will be test optional this year than ever before, which we'll see how that plays out. For a strong test taker, if they're test optional, I would say probably you still want to send it, right? And that's probably going to be a great part of your academic side. The other piece is they shouldn't really talk about your academic strength. They're going to talk about your curiosity, what you're doing as a student. They rarely would then have this overweight of what your academic record is saying. They're just part of another side of the review, like us trying to find that other part of the fit, not separate from the academic fit.
And I would just say that this is not I mean, for some people, this is not a settled question. I mean, like we will, much like any part of this year, we will respond to whatever the conditions are later down the line. And so at this point, we feel like there's a path going forward, but if there were to be a time where we don't feel like it would be in the best interest of students to move forward with the same policies we would, then we might adjust. And I think we also have to remember that there's other options between like required tests and test optional. So there might be some people who adopt a hybrid of some sort of opportunity for students and may even develop their own entrance exam or something. So this is an ongoing sort of discovery process that often involves faculty. And I think that's the other reason why you may not have a lot of this, you may not have final decisions from people, because people need time to really evaluate what that means overall. But this is, the holistic nature that we've always had as part of our processes, I think is going to take into consideration any sort of, circumstances as they arise.
And I think the situation reminds us all again about the kind of opportunity we have, given the unusual circumstances of the universe right now, to really sort of open our minds in terms of the kind of access and the kind of information that's available to you. So while it seems like the test optional piece is sort of new on the horizon as it is emerging at some places, up until this spring, about 1,100 colleges and universities in the nation were test optional. So it's not a new idea. I say that as a school that's been test optional since 1996. And so while it's a new opportunity at some places, and again, hopefully gives families an opportunity, and students specifically, to open up their minds in terms of what the possibilities are and the way in which they want to apply to a particular college or university. As confusing as it is, I think you look at it as an opportunity to really have some really expansive choices this year in ways in which perhaps you didn't consider them previously.
But for students who want to take the tests, now that there have been so many canceled test dates, any thoughts about pushing back early application deadlines? Since there'll probably be more students taking these tests into the fall that may not otherwise have been doing so.
I'll start with, as of right now, there hasn't been any change, at least on the front at Binghamton, for early action. It's non-binding. It's not a big deal. You're submitting your application by November 1st. But even last year, we could take your test scores up until December 1st. And I still think that gives plenty of time, for you still to submit. Not every school has that flexibility on submitting stuff afterwards, but I do foresee more flexibility on sending stuff in or deadlines if a school is going to stick with a certain policy that was more so based in the past.
Yeah, we currently don't have any plans to extend our deadline, but we also do have 2 rounds of early decision. The first round is you apply by November 1st, but then the second round you apply by January 1st. So it is possible that we'll see more numbers in the second round of early decision versus the first round. But at this time, we don't have any plans to extend that deadline.
Let's switch a little bit to grades. How are you going to view grades that students are getting this quarter, maybe third quarter? Can you talk about, I know you're going to see pass fail as opposed to actual grades. Do you care? Does that matter? There are some school systems where you can choose whether or not you want to grade in the subject or whether you want pass fail. How are you going to treat this brave new world?
I think the same way we've treated I think, again, we have to remember that this is not the whole of your academic record. This is a snapshot in time, and we're going to do our best with the information that's in front of us. I think what it might mean is that maybe there's and we've always placed emphasis on, if we require recommendations, that's another place where we might be able to get some good information. It's not like we don't have schools that don't give grades. We have some schools in our system that have never given grades. They give evaluations. And so it's not like this is a totally new set of circumstances. But again, this is why, about the value of holistic review is that we're going to look at whatever your school puts forth as, what the academic choices have been, what, all of that context. That's why they're putting additional information in the actual application, which I guess that's one of the questions that's coming. But I think, I think all of us are trying to respond and trying to provide prompts and lead you down the right path to make sure that we do have the right information. So I think we're going to deal with the circumstances as they are, but just remember that, again, maybe it's going to be this semester and maybe the fall, depending on what your school does, but we still have 2.5 years before that was not impacted by this.
Every once in a while, there's a student who says, but I was trending up and I'm probably doing better. How can you help that student when you're reading? Is there something else in the system that can help that student present himself or herself?
I think to start, we are all still looking for the positive in every application we look at, right? So we're not going to assume just because we saw pass fail that trend stopped. And there's plenty of time for the data points to continue. And I think that's also the mark that is missed. Sometimes students hear like trending up junior year, then plateaued senior year. Well, a good trend up means you kept trending up in senior year. Plenty of time for that part still. And I would say for selective college admissions, a trend up scenario, and I'm speaking on behalf of the schools that probably admit less than 40%, or so selective. They're making, for a student who started from the bottom and trending up, they're making that decision a little later in the process, right? We're not talking a student who had straight A's across the board. So again, that opportunity is playing into next year. Again, this is where I hope this spring has provided students an opportunity to figure out better ways that they learn, right? Again, looking at the opportunities here. When you get to college, there are going to be hybrid classes. Some are online, some aren't. You have pass-fail options then too. For a lot of students, this is a kind of a glimpse into a new world, and how you adjusted to that could also tell us a whole lot. It's less about just what's the solid grade at the end of the day. The letter recommendation might give us some more clues into what happened. And students, you still have opportunities to talk to us about things you noticed academically in this semester. And we take your word solidly, right? And that those are in your application. You'll have spaces, not just your personal statement, of course, that's an essay, but in your application, you'll have space to talk about things you noticed or changed academically if you want to share that.
Let's talk about that application, that there's an additional place to elaborate on the impact of the pandemic, whether it's a personal situation, academic situation. I know it says optional, but students are thinking, does this mean if I've been seriously impacted, like all of a sudden I'm going to a food kitchen when it never happened before, our mom lost her job, we can't pay the rent. Are you only looking for those kinds of issues, or is it something like, I was going to do X program during the summer and I had to pivot and do something else, and here's what I'm doing?
I don't think the students, it's important to make sure they don't feel a compulsion or an expectation to answer, but this has hit families and individuals in very, very deep ways. And it's a part of our job in reading applications is to get to know the student. That's ultimately, at the end of the day, we're trying to really get a sense of who they are as an individual, who they are as a learner, and who they would be as a community member on our campus. So if there is something, honest and genuine that helps to illustrate who they are and tell their story, then there's a place for that. But it is optional for a reason. This may be too difficult for some individuals to talk about with, admission strangers. And there may be some individuals who are in regions of the country that really feel quite removed from much of what is happening. And so that's not our place to judge. But it is an opportunity knowing that this, we're in a very unique moment in time, and we're living our own history right now. And it is important. And I do appreciate that Common App added this. So for students who do feel there's something to share, it doesn't need to take away from their personal statement or supplemental questions, where we don't want their entire application to be about COVID-19. There's so much more than this period of time, but they also will need a time, many students will need a time for reflection. And again, that's something that a student needs to answer that question themselves. Am I ready, and do I have something to share that will help them understand who I am? But we're also going to respect if students leave that blank. That won't mean it didn't affect them. For some students, it might be too difficult to write about, and we have to respect that space, that everyone is going to process this differently.
Okay. Good answer. Financial aid. What can families of seniors do if there have been changes in their circumstances since the time they filed FAFSAs or the profile?
Just for clarity, are we talking about seniors entering college now, or future seniors about to become seniors? Like, I mean, I guess the answer is still the
students
same.
who should be graduating right now.
Got it.
Whose circumstances have changed.
Right, and there are processes at every college. Usually the financial aid office is the one who will tell you about the process here, about how to talk about and show a change and document that change. For sure, there have been a lot of changes this year, and every school has a different way of looking and handling that, depending on how financial aid was even distributed in the first place. But I do always direct students and families, usually, because it's usually coming from the family side, to have that conversation. This will likely be the same thing that happens next year too, right? For those, when you submit your information for financial aid, it's going to be based likely on a year ago. So therefore, there might be a gap that we didn't notice. These are things that you can still very much communicate with financial aid offices up until when you get that financial aid package, whatever that is, until you have to make your final decision.
Okay, thank you. We've got some Division I schools here talking about athletics. How are you going to handle the fact that the NCAA is now okaying test optional? And what's happened to recruiting athletes, whether you're Division I, II, or III?
I believe the testing optional is just for the current seniors enrolling.
Yes.
And honestly, I can say, being a Division I institution, part of the Patriot League, and the selectivity of our process, we did not have a single senior in our class who had yet to take testing. So that will impact some individuals. And I still think there'll be decisions that will come out for high school juniors and individuals below in the process to help guide that conversation for students. I know it's a conversation we're having with our coaches right now, where we're still able to review applicants who they're interested in, because our emphasis has always been on the level of course rigor and the coursework and preparation for a writing and reading intensive liberal arts education. That's always where our conversation has been with coaches. There are some requirements within our league that our academic index does require standardized testing. So even though Colgate went test optional, there still will be a reporting element that will be required for our recruited athletes. But like we've said a number of times, if moving forward, that testing policy from a national level, or the authenticity of test scores, we just don't know. Right now we're working on what we have, but if we've learned anything in the last 3 months, it's that things can change quickly. And if they do, we will continue to regather, we will refocus. But the recruiting piece has been challenging for coaches because sports are on hold. And so it may shift the timeline a little bit. but we're not quite ready to sort of come out with what those changes are. As Sabrina mentioned earlier, many colleges, not all, but some have early decision 1 and early decision 2. We may very well be working with more of our athletes in a later process. Who knows, as we've said, none of us have made decisions about deadlines or anything like that. We've got a lot of time to figure out right now. You know, I think the coaches are doing the best they can. Communication is really where it's at. We started this session talking about communication, and I think this is another way where, when it works within your window and eligibility to talk to coaches, make sure you're really developing personal communications. The recruiting is about skill, but it's also about character. It's about building community, and students can still work on that part of it right now.
Okay, thank you. I want to leave time for questions because I know it's getting a little late. I just want to start out because I did get a question from a parent. It didn't quite fit into what we've been talking about. And the question is, if a student is applying to the music school or program at your university, how would you weigh talent versus the general academic requirements of the admissions process?
I mean, I think, well, first of all, many of these students that that are applying to highly selective music schools like ours, they've already had extensive contact with those professors over time. And so, but they also are still offering virtual lessons. They are offering so they're still making contact with students. I mean, this year changes nothing. I mean, it's always been, talent is an essential part of the selection process. I mean, certainly in our case, we have a conservatory style program that's within a greater liberal arts structure. And so we've always had to work with the Shepherd School of Music to make sure that the students can handle the work that they have to pursue outside of the music school. But certainly we want to support the Shepherd School, who's really kind of making their determination as to whether or not this is a world-class musician they want as part of their program. So I think, you know, they sort of set the tone, and then we try to support them in whatever evaluation that they have.
Okay, and everyone pretty much agree to that, with that assessment?
I think the difference is whether it's a Bachelor of Arts in Music program or a BFA. Oftentimes in the BFA side is that the talent piece is going to play a bigger role.
Right.
And the BA perspective and philosophy would be that it doesn't play as large a role as it does in the BFA audition process. So that's my general 2 cents.
Thank you. So let me look at some of the questions that came in. I think one of them you already answered about touring on campus. Involvement, recognizing that most study, travel, internship programs have been canceled.
So the activity piece as part of the application is an element that allows us to understand the student a little bit further in terms of what their interests are, what their talents may be, what they care about in terms of how they spend their free time. And that's defined a lot of different ways, and particularly this upcoming summer, given that it doesn't look the same as it may have in previous summers in terms of what those opportunities and accessibility to those opportunities might be, given limitations of travel or work, et cetera. You know, I've really encouraged students to really reimagine this in a different way as an opportunity to take a breath and actually ask themselves very meaningfully, you know, what's really important to them, and what are some innovative ways that you can connect to experiences safely from home in some cases, where you can actually then reflect those interests, reflect those talents, reflect the kind of person you are that you're going to bring to that future college campus. So I've made some suggestions even in terms of asking students, are there things now that you have the time and space that you've always wanted to explore? You know, did you ever want to learn how to play the guitar? You know, there's a lot of quarantine baking going on these days, folks, right? You know, did you ever want to learn how to bake or cook? Or is there a neighbor in need in your neighborhood? Does somebody need their dog walked? Does somebody need yard work done? There are things that you can certainly still do that are meaningful and reflect your interests and what you'll bring to a college campus in terms of character and contribution, but don't necessarily require that there's a study abroad trip or a program formalized that's part of it. The other piece is there's some responsibilities that are different for families now. For example, for some of our students, they're caretakers at home. Maybe they're looking after younger siblings so their families are working from home, or maybe there's a sick or elderly relative that lives with you. Those are all things too that we value as well. And while they're not formalized programs, they still give us a sense of what you're going to bring with you to our college communities, a year from now.
Right. Thank you. A couple of questions about the ACT. And how you feel that it changes the ACT with students able to retake only one section for a higher composite or super score. Amon, you must have feelings about this one.
We're talking personal feelings or university feelings?
How about university, Craig?
So, I mean, look, I guess every school will probably have a slightly different take on it, but the bigger picture here, that's a really good question, I would say, for a direct admissions office. Generally speaking, again, we're trying to look, a lot of schools super scored a while ago, and that became kind of a new thing. The point being, we're trying to take your highest perspective viewpoint into consideration. Like, we all want to talk about your highest sections and your highest scores. There's a lot of benefit to that. So I would err on the side that a lot of schools are going to like to see that, in the sense that it could help a student, but then it gets into another side of that fringe where we become test crazy again about, manipulating in a sense, like, let me only show the strengths here. So I don't want it to, make a broad stroke statement that it's good or bad, and how each school will do it. Right now, we're in Binghamton, we were going to take it into consideration just like we normally would look at a super score in that sense, because it shows the highest possibilities there. But I would, if the schools that you're applying to are all fine with it, then be fine with it.
And then one question came in about why not enroll in a community college and then shift into one of your schools?
I'm going to just start with this because I know there was a good point made before, because think about your 4-year trajectory and where you actually want to go from there. What is the real possibilities? And I'm speaking on behalf, because I represent a state system too, where 30% of our students come in from a community college. And they've been doing that since 1948, right? And it's been a great path. For a lot of students, some of our savviest students, it was the right path. They were admitted and decided to do that down the line. But that's how, like, many systems were built. A lot of state systems were built that way. So I still say it's a great opportunity. And if you think that's what you want, then do it. It's a different learning experience, and maybe some smaller class size you'll find elsewhere, but not to say you can't find a small class size at a community college too. So if it's on your mind, explore it. I would say there's benefits to everything that you can look at, and there's probably some drawbacks, but it's individual drawbacks that you have to look at.
And I think there's a question, I don't know if I follow it. Will colleges look at students who took the ACT in person prior to COVID and those that take it online post-COVID differently?
I mean, we're gonna have to trust the scores, right? Like how they come through. So I think we're gonna look at them the same way. If you had the opportunity to take it, great. There's still plenty of opportunity, even if they're in an online fashion, to take them. And if they matter for the schools that you're applying to, we're gonna use those.
Okay, this was really interesting because a lot of the questions that we got from families were similar. And I think you've covered a lot. This was a great job. I thank you, all the deans. I thank you, attendees. I hope we'll see many of you in the fall at the JCC when we're going to do this again. Hopefully we'll do it in person. And everyone, stay safe, be well. Thank you. Good night.